Greetings, good morning, and welcome to Mind the Moment. This, my friends, is our coffee house in the cloud, a place to come together, build community, get centered, and present ourselves to the present moment. It is August 11th, 2020, which just so happens to be the birthday of Robert Ingersoll, born in 1833, died in 1899. Ingersoll was a writer, orator, and all-around champion of free thought. Ingersoll wrote, quote, "This is my doctrine. Give every other human being every right you claim for yourself. Keep your mind open to the influences of nature. Receive new thoughts with hospitality. Let us advance," end quote. I'm John Roberts from Harvard Pilgrim Health Care's mindfulness program, and if there's one person guaranteed to make my mind crack open and crackle with hospitable thoughts, it is Jackie Johnson, professional certified coach, founder of Choice Coaching and Consulting, and a certified mindfulness instructor through the International Mindfulness Teachers Association. Good morning, Jackie.
Good morning, John, and good morning, everyone. Did you say with hospitable thoughts?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, good.
In just a moment, I will invite Jackie to lead us in a very hospitable 10-minute guided meditation. Following that, we'll take some time for Q&A and then wrap things up just before 9 a.m. Now, if you haven't already done so, please do take a moment to open up the chat box, which is accessible at the bottom of your screen. That chat box is your way to let us know anything that might be on your mind this morning. We'd love to hear from you. That being said, Jackie, is there anything you'd like to ask the folks at home to comment on as we're getting started?
Yeah, I'm deciding between two questions. So I'm curious about people's energy this morning and where it is. Is it here? Is it leaning forward? Is it reflective? Just kind of check in with your energy this morning.
Okay, all right, good question. So while folks are typing, please know that we're grateful to you for tuning in and taking the time to be with us and each other this morning. Please keep in mind too that only Jackie and I will be able to see anything that you type, and if we don't read your particular question or comment out loud, do know that we appreciate them all. Before we close, I will point out some other ways for you to stay in touch with us also. All right, so a few things popping in. Oh, so someone says, I've been up since 2:30 a.m., working, then sleeping, then working. I actually had a similar evening, so that's, I appreciate that. Somebody says they just went for a run. Energy is fairly high. Excellent. Someone says they have a sense of energy that's conflicted between past and present. Okay, so let's see if we can bring you back to the present moment today. Somebody says they have anxious energy. My head's spinning with thoughts. Somebody says their energy lately has been future directed. They're placing a lot of that energy in trying to plan things. Somebody else says they've been up since 3 a.m. I think that's a trend. It was a hot night last night here in New England. So, all right, I will cinch it off there for now and say that Jackie, as you know, and as some of our regular viewers may know, my wife and I are eagerly awaiting the arrival of our first child, whose due date was yesterday. We're certainly not the only ones for whom it probably seems like the world is full of waiting these days. I'm wondering if you might offer us some thoughts on what it means to wait mindfully as a lead into the meditation that you'll be leading us in this morning.
Yeah, thank you, John. And I was thinking about you as I kind of reflected on what I might want to share this morning. And John and I had a brief right before going live talk about, okay, and if she goes into labor during this half hour. So if John disappears, we'll know why.
You'll finally see what what's behind these doors, I think, if my wife has to come in.
Yeah, that's great. So even separate from John, I've just been finding over the last few weeks that I've been really curious about experiences of waiting in my life. And it's really been evoked by several entirely different kinds of situations where I've been waiting and aware of some kind of discomfort or restlessness that arises, and noticing the choices that I make in those moments, which are not always the most helpful or nourishing choices, is some of what I found. So some examples: I was on hold one day for 2 hours on waiting for somebody to pick up. I also had a situation of waiting for a repair person to arrive, waiting for an important phone call that was coming any second. And then also just a week ago today, later in the day, waiting out the storm that was going by. And it was actually pretty intense here. And sometimes I notice that for me, there's kind of a stuck quality, a stuck place while waiting. And it feels a little bit like it's not worth starting anything, because something's about to happen. And so sometimes what that might mean for me is I choose to, instead of starting something maybe more meaningful, I'll do another quick check of email, or let me check the news. And so that's not always helpful, and sometimes stirs up more discomfort. And last week during the storm, at one point, the weather got really intense, and with this isn't Kansas anymore quality, for those of you who remember The Wizard of Oz, and all of a sudden my fence blew down and my grill went flying across my deck and plants were flying. And I found myself just pacing, wanting it to end. So this waiting kind of quality has an interesting energy to it. I think it's usually, for me, there's sort of a leaning forward, either wanting something in some way to be different, not here. And then periodically, I would take a deep breath and just focus on the exhalation, sort of settling the nervous system, and dip down below the agitation to a place of peace. And notice that in this moment, everything is okay. So there's a metaphor that comes to mind for me. It's, I think of like being in the ocean, and on the surface, there's all this being tossed around in the waves, and we can expend a lot of energy fighting against that and resisting and striving and efforting. And if we dip down, not even really far, it's calm, there's a place of peace. And all this to me also translates in the broader context to noticing where we are in the midst of COVID, and other things that we may be in the wider world, noticing that we're waiting for some kind of change, or waiting for something to happen. And I was mentioning to John that one of my favorite words is liminal, or liminal space. And I pulled something up that I just like to quickly share around that. So liminal comes from the Latin word liminal, limen, meaning threshold. And it's a time between what was and what's next. So that probably particularly resonates for you right now, John. Just a brief reading from Richard Rohr, who's an author and Franciscan friar, describes this space as where we are betwixt and between the familiar and the completely unknown. There alone is our old world left behind, while we're not yet sure of the new existence. That's a good space where genuine newness can begin. Get there often and stay there as long as you can, by whatever means possible. And then he says, if we don't encounter liminal space in our lives, we start idealizing normalcy. So it's a little bit heady maybe, but interesting to explore this kind of liminal space and our leanings in it and what's available. So with that, I'd like to take us into a brief practice. So just taking a moment to check in with yourself here, and particularly checking in with the body, and notice if anything's needed in terms of movement before we settle into a meditative posture. Feel free to stand and stretch if you've been sitting for a period of time. if there's a particular movement that feels right to you, just take a couple moments to notice that. And then as you're ready, settling into whatever posture feels right for you in this moment. And that could be a seated posture in a chair or on the floor on a cushion, or it could be standing if that feels more energizing and right for you right now. And as you settle in, allowing the eyes to gently close if that feels right, or shifting the gaze downward just as a way of minimizing the distractions and allowing ourselves this more inward kind of a focus. And beginning with a couple of intentionally deep breaths. And again, if you're feeling any agitation, lengthening the exhale, really attending to that exhale as a way of calming, settling the nervous system. And if you're feeling sleepy, for those of you that did mention having a difficult night, conversely, focusing on the inhalation. And scanning through the body. What's here right now? And you might even invite a kind of compassionate, so how you doing? How's it going in there right now for yourself? And if it helps to add a word like, how's it going, sweetie? Just a way of inviting that sense of self-caring and compassion. And scanning through, particularly in the area around the head and the face, noticing any areas of tension or tightness in the forehead, around the eyes, the cheeks, the jaw, neck and shoulders. And just sweeping through on your own, noticing the direct experience of any sensations in the body, to include tension, areas that you might invite to soften, tingling, vibration, sensations of air movement, and even if there are any sensations of smell, an opening to include awareness of hearing, of sounds, and no need to go looking for anything, but simply making space for and allowing direct experience. And allowing the attention to rest on the experience of the body breathing. And you might notice that in a particular place. That might be at the nostrils, in the chest, in the belly, or it might be the whole of the body breathing, supported by the earth. If you're sitting, supported by the body in the seat, really feeling the weight being held, feet on the floor. Noticing the rise with the in-breath And then what happens on the exhalation. And see if you can locate a place in the body where there's a sense of peace or contentment or even just okayness. A place that you can dip into and just hang out beneath whatever may be going on the surface. And that might mean staying with the breath, might mean a focus on the heart space, could be the palms touching or the hands resting in the lap. Could be the feet on the floor. Sometimes it's really helpful to have the focus be as far away from the head as possible. And simply noticing what's here beneath the tumult. Taking time to rest in this experience. And as you notice emotions or sensations arising, you can intentionally shift and really focus on whatever is arising until it diminishes. If there are emotions that you find difficult to be with arising, knowing that you can kind of titrate that experience, hang out with them for a little while, and then return to an anchor that's easier, like the hands in the lap or the feet on the floor. And each time you find that you've bobbed back up to the surface and got caught up in thought or churning, no problem. Simply know that you can dip back to whatever anchor is easy for you. And sometimes in this noticing of waiting, we can notice that we're waiting for the practice to end. And that's okay too. Just notice what that energy feels like with curiosity. And whenever the mind wanders off, simply returning to whatever sensations help with a more easeful awareness. And as we bring the practice to a close, knowing that this place is always here. And so just as we're practicing in this more formal way right now, we can remember it in the tumultuous times in the day and days ahead, knowing that we can dip back in whenever we need to. May we all be safe and well. May we be peaceful. May we live with ease, with joy, and with kindness. And may our practice be of benefit to all. And as you're ready, bringing the attention from this more inward focus, slowly back to the world around you and to our coffee house community. Thanks for your attention.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Jackie. There's so much rich material in what you've covered so far. I hardly know where to begin here, but I think I'll begin just by saying I really loved what you said at the end of the meditation, referring to the idea that we have this, that we can refer back to, dip back into when we need to. And it reminds me that everything we do is, creating grooves in the brain, right? But now for everyone who is just participating with us, they have this meditation groove. It's in there now. Maybe it's a little faint, but it's there. And you can always get the needle back onto it if you need to. So it's now part of your experience, and that you can rely on. And I'm grateful to you for that new groove in my head. I also really liked what you said at the beginning, talking about if you're feeling a little bit sleepy, to focus on the inhalation. Could you just refer back to that a bit? It's an interesting instruction.
Yeah. So from a neuroscience perspective, and disclaimer that I'm not a neuroscientist, but intentionally lengthening the exhale, focusing on the exhale, activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which some of you have heard before here and other places, I'm sure, which evokes more of a settling. And then conversely, as we focus on or intentionally take a deep breath, and it's interesting to notice how our body does this pretty organically at times too, it really evokes that sympathetic nervous system and can be energizing.
All right, well, very good. All right.
I also noticed in the chat, somebody asked about the author that I mentioned. So that piece I read comes from Richard Rohr, R-O-H-R.
And actually, Jackie, if you don't mind, could I ask you to read it again? Because there was a lot in there, and I think it's worth just hearing a second time, if you don't mind.
Love to. So where we are betwixt and between the familiar and the completely unknown, that's really his definition of liminal space. There alone is our world, our old world left behind, while we are not yet sure of the new existence. That's a good space where genuine newness can begin. Get there often and stay there as long as you can by whatever means possible. And then he goes on to say, this is the sacred space where the old world is able to fall apart and a bigger world is revealed. If we don't encounter liminal space in our lives, we start idealizing normalcy.
Yeah, I think this is so relevant. When I think of liminality, I often think of something like a narrow bridge, which is a space between spaces. And if you're driving, you might be chugging along, and when you hit like a one-lane bridge or a narrow bridge, it actually causes you to slow down, have to sort of think about what you were doing. If you were sort of zoned out before, suddenly you're more focused. And I feel like that is the power of mindfulness as well. It's like when we are practicing, when we are meditating, we're laying down these one-lane bridges in our minds so that when we are just chugging along and not really paying attention, we hit the bridge, and then we're sort of forced to do that. I really connected with what you said earlier about finding yourself distracted in those moments where it feels like there's nothing, or you don't have enough time to do something. Because I find myself doing this constantly. If I'm waiting for like a pot of water to boil, and I'll think like, well, maybe I'll just check the news for a few minutes. And I have to say, after doing that, I think to myself, like, is this making me feel good? And the answer is invariably no. This is not making me feel good. And so
Yeah.
I've been trying to recognize that, hit that one lane bridge and think maybe I can just be here
Mhm.
with the unboiling water and just sort of see how that feels. And invariably, like, it feels a little bit better than just the endless, what I hear the kids refer to as doom scrolling, where I'm just sort of looking for the bad news. And it does not leave me feeling better than I was before. But
Yeah, it's interesting to think about, and I've been trying to play with, well, what other little nourishing choice could I make? Like maybe putting on a song that I love and dancing in my kitchen, or, what's a choice that will nourish and fill my heart? And then another thing to notice is maybe we're waiting in line, waiting to get into a store, or waiting in line for the cashier to pay. And it's like somehow this waiting and leaning forward carries with it a sense that there's something better. Like when I get in the store, that will be better than waiting outside the store, or something. And do we know that? So a lot of rich territory to get kind of playful and curious with, I think.
absolutely, absolutely. And wow, when you when you're mentioning standing in line at a store, I almost thought, like, what is she talking about? I have not been to a grocery store in probably 5 months, and it's but I remember. uh, so Jackie, I had a ton of questions to ask you, but I'm just going to ask you. I'm gonna fall back on maybe not an easy one per se, but one that's maybe going to be a little less complicated. Uh, I was going to ask you, begin by asking, it's been about 6 weeks since we've been together in this
Yeah.
coffee house, and I was going to ask what you've been finding to be challenging in that period, but I feel like we talked a bit about that with the waiting and thinking about waiting. But so the other side of that is, what have you been finding to be gratifying, or that's giving you hope about what might be coming next?
Yeah. Um, I think for me, it continues to come down to when I think about the most nourishing parts of my days a lot of the time, it's a couple of things that come to mind. And so I think that relates to what gives me hope. It's usually taking long walks and being out in nature and noticing the very okayness of the natural environment, right? That whether it's seeing the heron that I see on my walk along the brook right by my house, or it's often birds or flowers, things blooming, just all of that. And then it's the social connections. And I've heard a couple of talks recently about how that's one of our challenges, that for so many of us, that is the way that we take care of ourselves, take care of our nervous systems, and settle and feel nourished and grounded by having social connections, which is more challenging these days. So whether we take socially distanced walks with people, which is something that I can do where I live, or connecting with people in a virtual space and really still feeling the connection, that I think that that's just tremendously grounding. And all of those things feed my sense of hope and um, heartfulness.
Mm, that's beautiful. Yeah, and at the risk of, I don't mean to discount anyone's suffering, but I think in thinking about what you were saying, there's a lot of creatures that are doing great right now, and I feel like I can appreciate that the natural world is continuing along quite well, and that we can be nourished by that, and inspired by that. I think.
Yeah.
All good things must come to an end. And so let me just bring up this guy here. And remind everyone that we are back every Tuesday and Friday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern. You can find the links to these sessions and other resources at our main site at harvardpilgrim.org/mindfulness. If you have any questions for our experts that we did not get to here, or if you think of any later on in the week, please send them to askmtm@harvardpilgrim.org. We will get them answered. Or feel free to leave me a voicemail at 617-509-7047. We'd love to have folks check out the free resources we're offering around mindfulness and pain management through a partnership with Mindful Magazine. Those can be found at mindful.org/pain. You can always check out what we've been up to lately on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/mindthemoment. And you can rewatch this session, older sessions, and introductory sessions on our YouTube page, youtube.com/mindthemoment. So if I may, a final thought from Robert Ingersoll, who would have been 187 years old today if his body had been as timeless as his mind. He wrote, quote, "Kindness is strength. Anger blows out the lamp of the mind. In the examination of a great and important question, everyone should be serene, slow-pulsed, and calm," end quote. So in a time when we may sometimes mistake aggression for strength, when we may erroneously find anger to be clarifying, and when we may misunderstand the agitated mind as the best vehicle for wise thought, in such a time, Jackie Johnson, I'm grateful to you for your guidance. I'm wondering if you would be able to leave us with one resource that you think people would find useful as they continue to grow their practice.
Happy to. I pulled out a book that I really love, and you can probably see by all the little sticky notes in here that I go back to it a good bit. It's called How to Wake Up by Toni with an I, Toni Bernhard, Bernhard. She also has a book, How to Be Sick, and it's a guide to navigating joy and sorrow.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
A pleasure to be with you. And John, for everyone here, I want to say cheers and best wishes.
Thank you. I will be with you until the baby comes, and then there will be something else to replace me, but for a bit. But in the meantime, thank you everyone for joining. We will see you soon, and please do have a momentous day.